live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight,
the request for a further extension has been denied and was communicated to the President.
Acting Public Protector Kholeka Gcaleka shows President Cyril Ramaphosa no leniency. South Africa's prisons are overflowing once again. We'll look at what happened, how, why, and what needs to be done now. We'll also look at a looming war between civil society organizations and independent candidates on the one hand, and established political parties already part of the system on the other. Those outside wanting to get in believe they are being deliberately blocked via the Electoral Amendment Bill currently going through a parliamentary process. All that coming up in tonight's episode of the Watchdog, which starts right now. Acting Public Protector Kholeka Gcaleka announced today that she would be invoking her subpoena powers. This after President Cyril Ramaphosa missed the deadline to answer over 30 questions posed to him by the office for a second time. The Public Protector is investigating allegations of violations of Executive Ethics Code by the President. Before she was suspended, Public Protector Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane posed the questions to the President regarding the theft of millions at his Phalaphala farm in Limpopo. Opa Sekhalwe speaks on behalf of the Public Protector's office.
We confirm that the President had until July 18th, 2022 to respond to the allegations letter of June 7, 2022, after his previous request to have the initial return date of June 22nd, 2022 extended. A request for another extension has instead been filed. The request for a further extension has been denied and was communicated to the President on July 18th, 2022. The Public Protector Rules of 2018 as amended, which set out response protocols and timeframes in respect of investigations, provide in Rule 23, Sub-Rule 2B that where a state institution receives correspondence from the Public Protector South Africa, including a request for information in respect of investigations of alleged breaches of the Executive Code of Ethics, the institution concerned must submit a written reply or written substantive reply within 14 days, except where the Public Protector specifies otherwise, as per the extension granted in this matter until July 18, 2022. Rule 23 Sub-Rule 3 of the rules provides that where the state institution has failed to submit a reply within the time frames referred to in Sub-Rule 2 above, the Public Protector may direct the state institution concerned to submit a substantive reply, which reply must be received no later than 7 days from the date of the directive. The Public Protector South Africa will therefore be invoking its subpoena powers.
To try and make sense of it all, I'm joined by Iritume Tsipiri, who is a legal analyst. Good evening, Iritume. Thanks very much for your time. In very plain and simple language, what does this mean?
Good evening, Vuyo. Yes, I mean, in plain, simple language, and if you look at the language of the rules of the Public Protector Act, it means that there's, at some level, a failure to cooperate by the President with the request for information by the Public Protector in this instance. We know, as Mr. Sekhalwe articulated, the specific time periods that the rules set out for compliance with the request for information. And, there's two sections above that. I think it's section 22 or 21, which sets out what compliance or cooperation actually means. And it means, firstly, availing of the books or documents or records that are requested. It means giving effect to any extensions that have been granted and any agreements in that respect. So in this particular instance, a clear sort of lack of cooperation by the president. And obviously, the matter is escalating, as the public protector is saying, to say, well, now I'm invoking a power which, if not adhered to, there is a risk that, ultimately, I think it will be a matter of time really before we get there. But once a subpoena is issued, it means that if there isn't compliance with the subpoena, we could ultimately end up in a situation where criminal charges are laid against the president, and he may be charged for what would be really a contempt in this situation.
Well, from what you've just said, we've established that he is non-compliant, the president that is. So who must go to who now? What happens next? Does he wait for the public protector to subpoena him?
Well, I guess the question is, what is the reason for the non-compliance? We've seen the statement from the presidency saying that they are in discussions, or rather in contact with the public protector's office. And I suspect that the reason for that is to articulate the reasons for the non-compliance and ensure that, this subpoena can be met within its terms. So, when the public protector says she's invoking her subpoena powers, that's in terms of Section 7 of the Public Protector Act, which effectively means that the public protector will then issue out a subpoena and deliver it to the president with clear directions around the information that she requires, and how that subpoena should be met, and the timeframes within which that subpoena should be, or at least the directive should be met. So the next step, I suspect, if there isn't an agreement between the public protector and the president in respect of what the president says are communications with the public protector's office, would then be coming from the public protector.
But here's where I'm trying to understand it, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Given that he is non-compliant already, are there or should there be no consequences for him, irrespective of whether he has reasons that he may give later on, especially given the fact that the public protector has said no to another extension?
Yeah, I think we must, assess the level of non-compliance, if I can call it that, because a non-compliance with a request for information that's issued in terms of the rules, section or Rule 23 that Mr. Sekgalo was talking about, that doesn't visit similar consequences to a non-compliance with a subpoena, for instance. Mm-hmm. So at this level, we don't have the drastic consequences that would follow a non-compliance with a subpoena. So the public protector has done the right thing and escalated it to the right level in accordance with her powers. So this is the next level of dealing with the non-compliance. And obviously, if the subpoena is not adhered to, then the consequences are really dire for the president.
You see, it was important for me to, establish that, because remember, politics also enters, the fray in matters, especially in matters that have to do with the public protector and the president, and given everything else happening in this country. Because already you're beginning to hear people saying, she's lenient, with them, even, the invoking, of subpoena powers is only, is all talk, but there will be no action. Why isn't she acting right now, given the fact that she denied him, another extension?
Yeah, and I think that would be, an unfortunate sort of characterization of the issue, because she does, even within this context, have the power within the rules to grant a further extension within the rules. The rules very clearly say she has the discretion to extend the time periods even further than what the rules provide for. So she's been very firm with respect to making sure that the time periods that the rules provide are actually adhered to, and taking the natural next step that the Act allows her to take insofar as ensuring that there will ultimately be compliance with the request for information that came out of the former Public Protector's Office, if I can say that.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know perhaps I'm moving to the realm of speculation here, but perhaps also something that may well be, outside of, like, strictly speaking, the law as it relates to the Office of the Public Protector and the obligations that those she asks for information from have. But I mean, given our history, we know what a former president and what has happened over and over again. Doesn't the president run the risk of being seen to be a bit of a delinquent, whatever his reasons? In other words, when you don't meet deadlines, especially where it concerns an office as important as that of the Public Protector, and given everything else that has happened in that office and who is seen to be, or to like or not like who, would it not have been a lot more prudent for him to, at the very least, attempt to be compliant, and then, if then there's more information that he can provide afterwards, then he can do that, or be asked to do this? Could it not have at least made an attempt, saying, I could only go this far, but I know that I still owe this, that, and the other thing? Would that not have been, or is there no provision for that whatsoever?
Yeah, well, I think the risk is located, the risk of him being seen as a delinquent is actually located within the rules of the Public Protector Act, because the rules set out very clearly what cooperation entails. And cooperation also entails that if you've made an undertaking, that you've requested an extension and said, well, I will furnish the information by the date of the extension that has been furnished to me, and you don't actually furnish the information within that date, within the rules of the Public Protector Act, that is seen as non-cooperation. So it wouldn't be remiss or far off to say that he hasn't actually complied, or he is not cooperating, because that's what the rules of the Public Protector Act dictate. So I don't think it would be a risk of him being seen as delinquent, in as much as it is, if you apply the test in the rules, him being seen as non-cooperative. So it certainly may have served him if there was some form of partial cooperation in this particular instance, to at least say, well, I'm doing my best to comply as far as I can, and some kind of an explanation, which I'm sure he's articulated to the Public Protector for why there may be gaps with complying at this particular point in time.
Richumedze, let's leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
Well, after the break, South Africa's prisons are overflowing again. What happened and what needs to be done now? Overcrowding is rising in South African prisons again. Correctional Services Minister Ronald Lamola gave some startling new figures today in Parliament. From our parliamentary office, here's my colleague, Lulama Maitya.
According to the figures by the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Gauteng and the Western Cape are the leading provinces with more prisoners. They are followed by KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape. Organizations that champion prisoners' rights say overcrowding violates the rights of prisoners. They say this further affects the rehabilitation and reintegration of prisoners back into society.
Overcrowding in itself creates anxiety, it creates panic, and when institutions of corrections are overcrowded, there is less food that must be provided to prisoners. There is less attention, there is less security and safety because, the prisons are chronically overcrowded.
Prison authorities have considered that overcrowding is a major problem, but blame this on the country's rampant crime.
Overcrowding does strain our infrastructure. It means that some of the basic services such as hot water cannot be guaranteed at all times as the boilers get damaged at short intervals as they are stretched beyond the capacity that they can take. We'll continue working with what we have in terms of increasing the bed space.
The figures also show that there are 30,000 guards who look after the prisoners, and this figure is lower than the one needed. Lula Mamatya, SABC News, Parliament.
For a conversation on this, please welcome Singabako Ngumalo from the Department of Correctional Services. Lucas Munting is the project head, Africa Criminal Justice Reform at the Dala Omar Institute. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. If I may start with you, Singabako, we haven't spoken about prison overcrowding for a while. And then, boom, come these numbers. Does it mean that we've been looking the other way? That problem has always been there, it never disappeared? Or did something suddenly happen?
Once more, very good evening. You are correct in saying that we haven't experienced these numbers or this level of overcrowding in about 3 years or so. The reason being, we were coming from an era of COVID-19, which unfortunately is still with us, but not as severe as it was 2 years ago. And the country announced through the president what was then called the special remission of sentences of about 24 months and also for 12 months, depending on the type of offenses that inmates may have committed. And that did assist in terms of reducing the overcrowding levels. And after that, we also introduced what was then called COVID-19 parole dispensation. It took numbers way below even 100,000, which is something that we had not experienced in many years. Mm-hmm. And the lockdown did also assist because fewer people were committing crime. Therefore, we didn't have many people being admitted in our centers. But as the country was opening up slowly, we started then noticing an increasing number of people being admitted in our facilities as remandees, but also as sentenced people. And it has been increasing, also looking at the nature of crime that people are committing. And this has been happening gradually. Hence, now we find ourselves with an overcrowding level of 33.42%. In real numbers, that is 145,065. That is big when you compare with the approved accommodation of 108,000 bed space that we have. Hence, as a department, is something that we're looking into it to say how best can we push again with our overcrowding reduction strategy, but working with our partners in the criminal justice system so that at least the numbers, could be, brought down a bit. Although we are building other facilities, renovating some, creating additional bed space. But that is not ideal for a developing country like South Africa. We'd rather use that money in building schools and other infrastructure. But unfortunately, you cannot ignore the fact that people are committing crime. Therefore, we need to create additional bed space.
So it would be correct then to say that it's not that the numbers had really gone down and are now picking up. If there was no COVID, it would probably be back where we were 3-4 years ago.
And so I think about 3 years ago, we had an inmate population of about 165,000. That was the highest. But then the approved accommodation was about 119,000. So the accommodation has gone down a bit because we needed to look at some of our facilities, close down some for renovation purposes, and also ensuring that the old facilities are converted into rehabilitation centers, because some of our infrastructure was built many years ago, typically just to warehouse people. And we said we no longer want that. We want people to be rehabilitated. Therefore, we needed to close down some of them and repurpose them for rehabilitation. The bed space accommodation, has reduced a bit, but it will be increasing as we will be completing some of the projects. But we wouldn't want so many people in our facilities. Hence, it is important that we find ways to deter people from committing crime. And the amount of money that government has to then invest in correctional services surely, can be used, elsewhere. Hence, to come up with other strategies just so that we can make correctional services self-sufficient.
Lucas, I don't know what you think, of what Singabako has just said, and of course the numbers that my colleague Lulama earlier spoke to, which are the numbers, of course, which were released in Parliament by the Correctional Services Minister.
Yeah, it's not a new problem and it's not a new issue. And I think I want to make just a few points by way of introduction. The first is that it's not all prisons that are overcrowded. There is roughly about 236 prisons, and many of them are below or within capacity. I counted some 56 of these facilities. The really problematic situation with regards to prison occupation is in the large awaiting trial prisons that we typically see in the metros. So, for example, Paulsmoor or Johannesburg Medium A. And Josimampuru and so on. So those facilities that keep people awaiting trial for fairly long periods of time. And this is, this is not the fault of correctional services. This is the fault of the criminal justice process that routinely postpones cases a week at a time. It's typically 2 postponements before bail hearing is processed. So this adds to the pressure on the system. Cases are moving very slowly, and if it's complex cases, even slower. So that is something that we need to look at, because if we can fix that process, it will immediately alleviate the pressure on the Department of Correctional Services and our current capacity. The second, I think, important issue when we talk about prison occupation levels is sentencing. And at present, our sentence facilities are probably slightly better off because we are sentencing fewer and fewer people to prison because of the dysfunctional criminal justice system. But the few that do end up in prison are there for very long periods of time. So, for example, in 1994, we had about 400 people serving life imprisonment. At present, I think it's somewhere between 18 and 20,000. But with that came a lot of long sentences that were not necessarily life imprisonment, but they add to the occupation levels and the slowdown of turnover in the prison population. So we do need to look at that. My third point is to pick up on what was said about increasing the capacity of the prison system. And that means to build prisons. And the harsh reality is that if we want our criminal justice system to be more effective and impose imprisonment more on the right people who deserve imprisonment, in other words, serious, violent, repeat offenders, then we need to make provision for them. And I did a very quick calculation, and I said, well, okay, if the sentence population increases by 2% per year for the next 20 years, then that portion of the prison population is going to increase from its current level of around about 110,000 to 197,000. Add to that the awaiting trial population, and we are almost for the entire system at 200% occupation. And we don't have the capacity at the moment to deal with those numbers. So those are my three introductory remarks.
Singabako, I mean, Miles Budu was raising a few issues there. That, for example, you know, if prisons are crowded, it means there is less food. But it also means that there is less security. And towards the end of her piece, Lulama was talking about the fact that the numbers you have of people who have to mend these prisons is actually less than what you require for the numbers of people you have in these prisons.
Okay, firstly, let me address Miles Budu's point. It is nowhere near reality. We've had far bigger numbers than what we have currently, you know, in the past. And we have managed to survive not just because we were really struggling for whatever we could, you know, get, but there is proper planning that, you know, that we embark on. And we are able to monitor the situation. We're able to see, you know, where the pressure points are. And we're able then to augment, you know, the type of resources that we need to make available. And when it comes to food, we don't struggle there at all. You will know that we cook for ourselves. Yes, we do have to procure perishable and non-perishable items, but we prepare those meals, and we can make other means in case some facilities do not have sufficient stock, because it is true that it's not all correctional centers that are overcrowded. It is largely those in metros, but when you go out to the periphery and the small towns, there's no overcrowding at all there. But the system that we have through the National Operations Center, we can see where we have reserves, then we can utilize where we are feeling the pressure. But also looking at the number of our officials, I'm talking about boots on the ground. You know, our vacancy rate is still below the 5% threshold, so we are doing quite okay, and we've made it a point that we fill vacancies to avoid a situation where we may find ourselves vulnerable. In correctional centers, you cannot take chances. You have to make sure that there is sufficient security and that you can protect not just inmates, but staff members as well. So as a department, we are able to make it a point that we are fully resourced. So the situation, it's not looking good in terms of overcrowding, but we are managing. Hence, it is always important to work with our partners within the criminal justice system to say how are the cases moving, so that some could be finalized speedily, and inmates who are due for parole consideration are considered and are placed out, having meaningfully earned that right. So as a department, you know, we can say the numbers, yes, are increasing, but we are managing well thus far.
And of course, you don't have a Bosasa to pay billions to. Of course, you don't have to answer that.
No,
but Lucas, I mean, as an outsider looking in, I mean, often when people talk about overcrowding, usually you'd have human rights and other interest groups raising, you know, questions around or telling us that, you know, even prisoners do have rights as well. Are there such concerns at all at the moment?
The deprivation of liberty is a very drastic intervention in any person's life, and so there is always a risk of rights violations. And to a very large extent, we rely on the work of the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services to monitor the treatment and conditions of detention of prisoners. And so we get a lot of information from the inspectorate about what is happening. But there are still concerns where serious allegations are made, and one questions the quality of the investigations being undertaken, whether it is fair and proper that the Department of Correctional Services investigates its own alleged transgressions. We also see if there are such serious allegations and transgressions, it's a very rare occasion that correctional services officials are prosecuted. And the same applies to the police. Very seldom that they are prosecuted for rights violations. So these are things that we must work at, that there is hopefully legislative changes coming in respect of the inspectorate. And hopefully the National Prosecuting Authority will also take a different view on these at times very serious allegations and sometimes fatal incidents implicating officials of the Department of Correctional Services. So those are standing concerns. I think we need to remain vigilant. In the end, I think we all want the same thing, is that the prisoners as well as the officials are able to treat each other with dignity.
But on a scale of 1 to 5, would you say, Lucas, we have fairly adequate safeguards?
The Constitutional Court, for example, in the Sonke judgment, found that as the law currently stands, that the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services is not sufficiently independent from the Department of Correctional Services. So that is an important safeguard that was not adequate. That's, I think, a fairly comprehensive answer to your question about are there adequate safeguards. No, the Constitutional Court said no, it's not sufficient. We need to strengthen it. And that job is now with Parliament to fix it before the end of the year.
Well, and hopefully parliamentarians too, like your portfolio committee on correctional services, would also play their oversight role. Gentlemen, let's leave it there for tonight. Thanks very much for your time, Singabako Numalo and Lucas Munting. Up next, our political parties already represented in Parliament slamming the door on new independents who want to contest elections. That's what we're asking next. Welcome back. The Electoral Amendment Bill currently being processed by Parliament is not only unfair to independents who want to contest elections, the proposed law may also be unconstitutional. Well, that's according to independents and civil society organizations with a keen interest in the matter. Musi Maimana, the leader of the One SA movement, is among them. He joins us on the line. Also on the line is Brandon Pillay, who is an ANC MP who serves in the National Assembly's Home Affairs Portfolio Committee, which has been processing the bill. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. If I may quickly, Musi, what are your key issues? What are you objecting to exactly in the bill as it stands?
Yeah. Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. I think, first of all, let's depart from the perspective of what the Constitutional Court ruled on. It said not only that it was a function of allowing independents to stand in an election, but to actually give full effect to power to the people, as Judge Madlanga said. So one of the key issues is that in the current proposed bill, it doesn't go down to constituency-based model, which means that, in fact, it reduces a constituency to a province. So ultimately, accountability is lost in that instance. Secondly, I think the proportional representative component of the vote means that political parties are overly favored. So the threshold for an independent in the proposed bill, if you do the numerics behind it, mean that for them to qualify, they have to get over 80,000 votes, as an example, in a province, whereas a political party could literally get 40,000 nationally and still be able to get a seat in parliament, whereas that independent wouldn't get a seat. And even if they got over 80,000, it would still only be one seat, whereas a political party could, after the proportional representative aspect of it, get 2 seats. And then lastly, I think if you're going to give full effect to the law, you need to uphold the principle of fairness, which speaks to the principal question that says that the threshold for independents to be able to participate in an election hinges on the fact that they not only have to get 20,000 votes, which, if you think about it, not even a ward councillor gets that, and in certain instances, or 20,000 signatures to qualify. And in fact, for a political party to register for an election, it doesn't need that many signatures. So I do think we've missed a massive opportunity directed not only by Judge Zondo and the State Capture Commission to say that actually there must be a time where we amend the Electoral Act so that we can address the issues of accountability, but it's also a missed opportunity to be able to say, let's give citizens back the power by them being able to directly elect the people that represent them and get to know them, so that ultimately we can improve the delivery of the national competence of services such as healthcare, safety, security, which are issues that the city doesn't deal with. Okay. So to me, I think it's sadly a missed opportunity.
Brandon, you had Musi on those 3 key issues that are fundamental to him and like-minded people.
So let me start off by saying that an independent candidate that chooses to contest the election is choosing to contest the election as an individual and not as a collective. Hence, it's absolutely difficult for one to even begin to think as to how you would want to occupy more than one seat if you are just one person. As an independent candidate, you contest the elections, and if you meet the threshold and you get enough quota or enough votes to acquire a seat, it means that you're going to occupy just one seat. Now, this is something that has to be very clear, and I think it's important to understand that even if you had more than 40,000 votes, like in what Musi is saying, 80,000 votes, the fact is that you are one person and you're only going to occupy one seat. But what is important to note is that the Constitutional Court ruling said that we should allow for an ordinary citizen of the country to be able to contest the elections. And this is exactly what the Electoral Amendment Bill is doing. I also hear the point about a constituency-based electoral system. Now, this means changing the electoral system in its totality. And unfortunately, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in as a country, and having gone through 2 years of a lockdown and COVID, it was almost impossible for us to be able to change the electoral system to a constituency base. And I think that discussion has even ensued at a parliamentary committee level, saying that at a later stage, perhaps if there's a need to, and if it is something that one needs to venture into, that it can only be done in the next election. Now, you have to understand that we were already behind time. We had to request an extension for a further 6 months to be able to finalize this electoral amendment bill so that we allow for independents to contest in the 2024 elections. And hence, we have come down to where we are right now to ensure that we allow for independents to participate in the elections. But again, there has to be certain requirements. It can't be that just anyone decides to get up one day and contest an election without having shown any kind of support or any kind of base to be able to contest a national election.
Okay, just a couple of quick ones from me before I get back to Musa. Does it mean, on the constituency issue, does it mean that you are amenable to sort of the idea? In fact, you prepared to go that route. It's just that you haven't had time. Is that correct?
I'm saying that as a committee, the discussion did reach us at the initial stage. And the discussion that ensued said that we could look at this at a later stage and be able to look at the merits. Again, we have to be able to look at it and how this is going to even unfold. Let me just tell you right now that the current amendment bill is so complex. It is absolutely complex that it's difficult to be able to even really reach consensus on a few items because it's really complex.
But,
I imagine
I'm trying to understand the nature of the problem. Is the problem time?
Which is the time? Are you talking about constituency based?
Yes. I'm still on that point, yes.
Yeah, well, that was not going to be able to be achieved in this space of time. No.
Okay. And then
can I?
Yes, come in.
You will recall that when Mr. Pillay cites the issue of time, there are a couple of delay things that actually occurred. The minister went out and set out a ministerial advisory committee. That ministerial advisory committee considered two alternatives, a minimalist approach or, in fact, a 200-200 proportional approach, which was to allow for 200 members of parliament to be directly elected and the 200 to be proportionally represented. The committee then adopted a view of the minimalist approach for whatever reasons they would have felt, and it's not my job to do that. But I do beg to ask the question, given that they had a time, there was a private members' bill that had already prescribed some of these issues at the time, post the judgment, that could have been considered, that whilst other parliaments all over the world, literally in the middle of COVID, continued the business of trying to do consultation and law drafting, our parliament didn't, to be fair, particularly on this matter. The public consultation process only began literally in the January of this year, which meant that for citizens to be able to actually give input into the lawmaking process began quite late. So to me, I hear that, yeah, we had COVID, we had this, but frankly, I think that the people of this country legitimately, given that they are living under state capture, have every right to ask what was each parliament doing and what actions will it take electorally to make sure that in fact this never happens again. Because the current electoral bill that has been put forward, in fact, will continue to allow for state capture to occur. And whilst Mr. Pillay is correct in saying you can't occupy one seat, but independent doesn't just mean individual. It may very well mean independent of a political party. So if there's a number of independents that sit, surely in the proportional component of the issue, they should also be able to qualify that you can have more independents come into play in that sense, in the same way as a political party would be able to do so. Because quite frankly, if you say you produce a list as a political party and you end up with people who are unknown to people, they benefit and get more seats, even if citizens do not know those people. So to me, I think that the bill as is prescribed has favored the political action rather than in fact stuck to what could have been potentially a game changer in fighting state capture and holding political parties accountable.
Brandon, is the door shut now? I know that, I mean, your process as the portfolio committee is almost at the end. The bill still has to go to the NCOP for concurrence. Is there no opportunity whatsoever to sort of try and find one another, or to try as far as possible to still, improve the bill?
Okay, let me just say that we are at the point of the A list, and the A list is where you would go clause by clause in terms of the amendments. That committee sat today looking at the A list. On Friday, we sit again. And let me just say that the Parliamentary Committee on Home Affairs has been working all through recess. Parliament is currently on recess, but the PC on Home Affairs is actually sitting to be able to finalize this. And that is how important this amendment bill is to us, to ensure that we are able to complete the process. Yes, it's going to go to the NCOP, and they may well open that up for further public participation and consultation, and for there to be further comments. But there's just one point I must stress, that you can't say you want to be an independent and then form a group and have a list. You have the freedom of choice, freedom of association. You either form a political party or you contest as an independent. How do you contest it as an independent and then become a collective? You decide whether you want to contest this election as a political party or as an individual.
Very quickly, 10 seconds, Mosi, on that very last point, you have those choices, don't you?
Of course you do. But if you then will stick to that rule, then make sure that when the scores are counted, the mandate is measured correctly, rather than in fact saying, if you only provide a single ballot, which is what was partly proposed and now has been improved on, thankfully, that those excess votes don't just suddenly get donated to political parties, because that's not the will of the people.
Okay, let's leave it there for tonight. Let me thank. 10 seconds quickly.
No, I'm saying that's never going to happen. You're never going to donate votes to a political party. I mean, this is a fair process.
Okay.
You vote for an independent, you vote for a political party. It's your choice.
Okay, let's leave it there. Gentleman Brandon Pillay, who is an ANC MP, serves on the National Assembly's Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs. Musi Maiman is the leader of the One SA movement. We haven't heard the end of this particular story. But for now, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for watching. Till we talk again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.